morning. Good morning, Maker Faire. Hi. It is so good to see you all. Oh, we've got Starship Troopers and R2s over here. It's super awesome. Hi, everybody. You're some big kind of brain bug. Good morning. Good morning, Maker Faire. I don't think I have done a Sunday sermons indoors since the Faraday cage robot dance. Yeah, I'm seeing nods. This is a deep... Okay. I often show up here with some notes for a talk that I have just slapped together. Today I have no notes because what I want to talk to you about is something I've been sort of mulling in my head, and I thought instead of trying to outline it, I'm just going to download it to you. In my science communication, in trying to communicate to other folks, I'm always looking for a personal connection. And sometimes I'm reading science stuff and a personal connection shows up and I'm curious about it. And that's how this story gets started. I was reading McCullough's biography of the Wright brothers. And I was thinking to myself, I'm reading through their childhood. They have this very interesting dad and mom who require them to argue their points. And they have a reference library in the house, and the kids and the parents have a structure in which they argue their points back and forth to each other using logic. The parents' minds can be changed. And Orville and Wilbur and their sister grow up in this atmosphere. And I'm thinking, as I see them, they go to high school, they start businesses, they were serial entrepreneurs. And I'm seeing about when they started the business, and I'm thinking, how old were they? And then I note that Wilbur was born in 1867, exactly 100 years before I was born. And so now when I'm looking at the years he's starting stuff, they all track with my youth because they're the same last two numbers. And it starts to give me this interesting perspective on them. And then later on in the book, there's this point in which the Wright brothers have learned to fly. They've tried to sell their airplane to the US government, who doesn't believe that they can fly. So they go to France, and they're like, would you like our plane? And France is like, oui. And Wilbur heads over to France with one of their airplanes, and it arrives totally trashed. The mail was as bad then as it is today. And Wilbur then spends 40 days reassembling this plane. And it's the biggest news in France. He's in this warehouse, imagine a warehouse this big, and Orville is in the middle of it working on this plane, slowly retying and fixing every little thing. And he's doing this for 40 straight days, all day long, every day. And while he's doing this, 10,000 people every day are arriving outside the warehouse, and they're all standing and looking in the windows and watching him. And I'm thinking about Orville working, finding his silence in this moment and just working on his thing while everyone's watching. And I feel a little connection to this. I feel there's no part of this that has me trying to equate myself with the Wright brothers. Not at all. They are bizarro gods. But that connection helps me isolate some of the personalities involved. So the Wright brothers are more amazing than anybody has told you. They're more remarkable. They started and ran a successful bicycle building company. And a bicycle was the newest mechanical invention in the late 18th century. This was they were tech bros. They were startup founders. And not only this, their bicycle company was successful enough that as soon as they realized they wanted to learn how to fly, they were able to leave their company running itself for 5 months a year while they went off to figure out how to fly. Now, here's what they thought. They thought if flight is a solvable problem, it has two components. One is power, and one is control. And power is simply the wind, and that's probably the easier of the two problems to solve. See, most people had built planes trying to solve both at the same time, and that's why they all jumped off buildings and landed on the ground without any cushioning. But the Wright brothers realized that control was the tougher problem, so they spent 3 or 4 years solving the problem of control, building ever bigger and bigger kites. Oh, right, this is also cool. How did they figure out where to fly? They knew they needed a headwind of at least 20 miles an hour because that would supply the power for the lift they wanted. They also knew they wanted sand on the ground so they wouldn't die when they fell out of the sky. So they wrote to all like 107 weather stations in the still somewhat young United States, asking who's got the headwind and who's got the sand. And the Outer Banks of the Carolinas responds and says, come to Kitty Hawk, we have exactly what you need. So they do. Here's how far Kitty Hawk was from the world at this point. It was a 2-day sailboat ride from the nearest place you could get a train to. And in the biography, it includes this line: most of the inhabitants of Kitty Hawk in 1895, when the Wright brothers arrived, did not get there overland. They were descended from shipwrecked sailors. How is that not the first fact I learned in science class? Like the Wright brothers learned to fly in a pirate cove? This is the best story ever. And then they go out for like 3 solid years. They keep going out. They're flying ever bigger and bigger kites. And then they figure out how to make a kite work. They figure out the mechanics of actually getting it to do what they want safely. And they're like, okay, great. Now it's time for power. And they don't fly for like 2 full years. They just put away the successful experimentation of that part of control, and they build what to them is the world's smallest internal combustion engine at the time. And it's like, it weighs like 40 pounds and it gets like 7 horsepower or something like that. But it's got a cast aluminum block. And to be sure, there are other, let's be clear, like some of you I'm sure have a bailiwick about someone who flew long before the Wright brothers. The Wright brothers flying was an occurrence of convergent invention. If they didn't fly when they did, someone would have within a couple of months. Honestly, it was that close all over the world. And there were other internal combustion engines in the world that were lighter than theirs, but they didn't know about it because there was no internet. These people all had to write to each other all the time. And when you read their letters, actually, that's the other thing, is the Wright brothers and the Wright brothers family were deeply and sort of beautifully affectionate in their letters to each other, including with other flight enthusiasts. So after they learned to fly, they got letters from all over the world. They were very open about sharing their information. And to be like really astonished to me, it was really astonishing to me how knowledgeable Wilbur and Orville were about flight mechanics. I know that sounds silly because they learned how to fly, but they really did understand it at this deep level that is like at probably the very top level even today. So, wait a second, where am I? The Wright brothers, right. So, they build the internal combustion engine, and then they go back to Kitty Hawk with the engine and their plane, and they put the engine on the plane, and the plane flies on its second freaking try. That is so annoying. A docent at the Smithsonian told me this lovely story. You can look it up on your phone right now, that picture of the first flight of the Wright brothers. Wilbur is flying and Orville is standing there like this, and you can see the plane has just come aloft. But what's to notice in this photograph is look down to the lower right, and what you'll see is sort of the outline of the tail of the plane on the sand. And you realize it's footprints from the outline of this is actually where the plane was sitting. And there it is 40 feet away, and it's already aloft. That's how buoyant it was in the air. Like it just immediately, I don't know if you've ever flown in a tail dragger, an old like World War I, 1917, 1915 kind of plane, but they're fascinating because they feel super uncomfortable when you're on the ground. And then the moment they get aloft and they sit in the air, you realize you're in a machine that's meant to do this. And the Wright brothers were the first. And as I examine stories like this, sometimes I write rhetorical flourishes. I write ideas, and then I think about those. And I wrote, as part of this thinking process, that the Wright brothers solved the world's oldest mechanical engineering myth, the myth of human flight. And then I thought about it. Is that really true? Is Icarus and Daedalus, the story of Icarus and Daedalus and the wings flying too close to the sun, is that the oldest mechanical engineering myth? And then I started researching Icarus and Daedalus. And the Icarus and Daedalus story is not only weirder than it has any right to be, it turns out that like all of Greek mythology is effectively like pro wrestling is today. And by that, I mean a really important outlet of narrative drama and awesome, weird crap. I really respect pro wrestling. I respect the theater of it. And frankly, jousting in the medieval age was also a version of pro wrestling. We've always had something like pro wrestling. And I was thinking about the Icarus and Daedalus myth, and the first thing I was thinking about was what I was taught in school, which was that it was a story about hubris, about challenging the gods by trying to do too much. And I called some scholars, and they explained to me that the Greeks did not think of the world the way we do, where we think of the world as something that is improving a little bit all the time, getting better for each person, each generation. The Greeks were like, things are static. People have their places. We don't move out of those places. And then Icarus and Daedalus tried, and they failed, and it's about hubris. And at my age, in my late 50s now, I'm starting to feel, and I think some of the older folks in the audience can attest to this, I'm starting to feel a connection to makers throughout history. And I feel like I'm part of that continuum. And as such, I feel qualified to think about these things, and I thought to myself, hubris is not something that makes a story last for 2,500 years. Like I think there's something else underneath this idea of Icarus and Daedalus that's the reason we're still telling the story. So let me tell you the story of Icarus and Daedalus, because one of the most fun things I've ever done was to read all like 6 different versions of the story in all the Greek source material, because they're spectacularly strange. They don't all agree with each other, but this is the rough outline. King Minos, who is the son of Zeus, he's a half man, half child, because Zeus was always showing up on Earth and birthing half children. It was not a cool practice. Anyway, Minos was king, and he vowed to sacrifice all of the best bulls to please the gods. And Poseidon was like, that is an awesome plan. I'm going to send an incredible bull for you. And this gigantic white bull comes out of the ocean. And Minos is like, that is the best bull I have ever seen. I'm going to keep it over here, and I'm going to sacrifice this bull. And Poseidon is like, no, you don't get to make that call. And then Poseidon, being a god, is like, how do I screw with Minos? I know. He says, Minos, your wife is in love with this white bull. She can't stop thinking about him. And his wife is so overtaken with passion and love for this bull that she calls Daedalus. That's how Daedalus shows up in this story. And I'll comment on my thoughts of Daedalus's morality later, but Daedalus shows up because Minos' wife says to him, can you build me a costume in which I will look like a female bull? That's like some Bugs Bunny level stuff. And Daedalus builds her this cow costume, and she and the bull, they have a thing. And then she has a kid. She has the Minotaur, this half man, half bull, a monster, described in every account as a monster. And I didn't, for some reason, in all of my reading, I was late to understanding that this monster had a name, and his name is Asterion. And the Minotaur, so Minos has this bastard monster child, but he doesn't kill it. He asks Daedalus, the cleverest architect, he asks Daedalus to build a labyrinth that to put the Minotaur in the center of. Now, the labyrinth is, in one sense, it's a prison cell, but in another sense, it's also protection. He's keeping people from getting there. And it isn't until Daedalus reveals the secret of how to get to the Minotaur to Theseus that Theseus is able to kill the Minotaur. Okay, hold on. Let's go for right. And so Theseus goes and he kills the Minotaur, and Minos is really pissed off. And he starts searching for Daedalus, and that's when Daedalus and Icarus have to build the wings to escape. And they do, and they describe this process in actually some sort of loving detail in a couple of the accounts. I think Ovid's Metamorphosis is by far the most flowery account. And they describe the actual wax and the feathers and the pitch and the rope. They describe a whole bunch of the mechanics. And then as they practice, there's this lovely description of Icarus, the young one, having so much fun flying. And Daedalus is like, yes, that is really fun, but also this is super dangerous, so I'm going to need you to follow some guidelines, which of course Icarus does not follow. And in the accounts, specifically in Ovid's Metamorphosis, there's this moment in which Icarus falls out of the sky. So, like, yes, you've heard that he flew too close to the sun. I'm not sure that this is a myth about melting wax either. I think that's also bullshit. I'm sorry for cursing. I know there are children in the audience. What you need to know is that cursing is really, really cool. What you don't yet know is that adulthood is a wanton slog, and it is a never-ending stream of bills to pay and responsibilities, and cursing is our reward. And the only problem we have is when we hear children curse. So, just curse around your friends and we won't have any issues. So, Icarus is flying, and Daedalus says to him, look, don't fly too low, don't fly too high, but essentially what he says is, follow me. Follow me. And they are flying. And Icarus is not following him because he's a young man and he's excited and he's doing the things that he's doing. And he falls out of the sky. And Ovid describes this as being witnessed by a plowman and a random fisherman, but that the father doesn't see his son fall from the sky. And this event is only witnessed by people who don't know. And this is actually, you can find, there's a bunch of Renaissance paintings of this exact moment of Daedalus flying, Icarus behind him, plunging into the ocean, and some guy on a plow being like, what is that? And I read this, and I had this epiphany about being a dad. So I have two kids, Thing 1 and Thing 2. I've talked about them since the beginning of Maker Faire speeches, and they are now 25-year-old young men. They're amazing. I love them. I'm so proud of them. I'm amazed that they actually want to hang out with me. And I've had, of course, like every parent, I've had some surpassingly difficult times with these kids. Up to and including like driving across country to rescue one from a difficult situation and then driving around trying to get to know him again. And when I was driving around the country with Thing 1, getting to know him again and sort of just trying to figure out our future together, I had this thought back to Icarus and Daedalus, which was that I really resonate as a dad with that idea of like, stay with me, follow this path, and then that not happening. And to me, that is the first time I realized what I think the story is about, which is, it's about the hubris of thinking that we can guide our children through their lives, because we can't. We want to. We're desperate to. We're desperate for them to get that full download of all the crap we've learned dealing with idiots and assholes and everybody. Again, sorry, children. You're welcome. We want that control. We want you guys to know all the things that we know. And we can see you not knowing it, and we can also see that we can't tell you the things that you need to know. You have to learn them on your own like we did. And there's a beautiful grace to that surrender, but it is also painful for every parent in every situation. And for me, the workbench... Look, the truth of adulthood, I said it was a slog of responsibilities. It's also mystifying and scary. And life comes at you fast no matter how good it is. And the workbench is the place that I get to pretend I have some measure of control over the world. It's totally a pretense. I don't have any control over how things go. But at the workbench, I feel some measure of control. And diving into that feeling, diving into the thing that gives me succor when everything else is sort of banging on, has been the engine for everything that I've gotten to do in my life. And that's what I think that making really does for us. And again, I want to state for the record, as I do every year, making is not the physical making of things. It is any time you use your point of view, your unique outlook on the world to make something in the world that didn't exist before you got here. Your point of view is the most primary thing, and I'm so here just to learn what someone else's view of the world is. And that place at the bench where we find that succor, I feel like that's where we become people. That's where we become human beings. It's where I've learned empathy. It's where I've learned empathy specifically for myself. More than almost anything else is realizing that internal monologue is not telling you the truth about yourself. I heard a lovely thing that the first thought that comes through from your internal monologue is the one you learned from your parents. And the second thought that comes through is the one you figured out on your own. I really like that. The Wright brothers. Going back to, so again, I told you I didn't have a real format for this. I've just been thinking about the Wright brothers and their amazing excursions and their beautiful affection for each other. And I think about Icarus and Daedalus. And there's a really specific moment. So the Wright brothers' father was a preacher. He was he was willing to have conflict for his beliefs. He was a really remarkable human. And he wrote a column. He had a little newspaper in Dayton, Ohio. He really actually was an early inclusive warrior. He was a really, really unique guy. And he kept a diary for like 55 years. He wrote something every single day. And so you can see in 1914 when Wilbur dies, he writes something along the lines of, "There's just no light today." Something like that. You feel this incredibly reserved gentleman feeling an impossible loss and addressing it with words at this moment. And that resonates to me as a dad. Thank you guys for letting me tell you this story. Thank you.
Thank you guys so much for watching that video. We have some brand new merch available at the store. A dog's age ago, I mean like 2018, 2019, this wonderful graphic designer named Brian Otterer reached out to us and sent us some stickers. He has a design firm called Dash 3 Dots, and we loved his stickers so much we wanted to sell them on the merch store. Well, he updated them with our new logo, and we've got Adam in the Martian spacesuit sticker. We've got Adam in the shuttle suit sticker. We've got Adam in the Apollo suit sticker. And my personal favorite, Adam in the alien spacesuit sticker. Get yours now, tested-store.com. Hey!